Hello and welcome to session 3 of Mindfulness Matters, an online demand series to help you stay present and help boost productivity in the workplace and beyond. Today we are going to explore our progress so far. We're going to look at the term anchoring and how this is used in different settings, but most importantly what anchoring means in mindfulness. We're going to be exploring our 5 senses. We'll be going through a guided practice, and I'll be giving you a few simple takeaway practices for you to experiment with at home. Now, a short reintroduction to who I am. My name's Lily Parkinson. I'm founder of my company Umiani, where I work as a holistic and intuitive coach, a registered nutritional therapist. I also work with cognitive behavioral therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, and emotional freedom technique. And I'm also a Reiki practitioner, and now I work with all of these different modalities with both private and corporate clients. So let's look at our progress so far. So hopefully you've already had the opportunity to carry out some of the practice that we have been through in the past 2 sessions. If you haven't, then that's okay, there's still time to. Remembering that you can practice mindfulness anywhere, any place, with any situation. It's super easy. And it's going to bring you loads of different benefits. It's going to help you start making a really positive change in the workplace, at home, and in your general life with your relationships and how you communicate, for example. Now, if you're finding it difficult, then that's okay. That's completely normal. The resistance that some of us experience with this practice is because our minds really don't like to live in the present. We are so used to living through perhaps a conditioned mind, or living in the past, or projecting into the future, and our mind actually enjoys using kind of the energy that's created by anxious and fearful thoughts, which is why we can experience some resistance or some difficulties with this practice. But mindfulness is a practice. We just have to remember to practice it, and once we grasp it, it's really quite simple. So far we have looked at the breath, we've looked at the pulse and the heartbeat briefly, and looked at how we can come back to the present moments through bringing our awareness to our bodily sensations. And this week, the new tool that we'll be learning will be coming through our 5 senses and how we can use this to connect with our with the present moment and our awareness. But firstly, we're going to look at anchoring and how this is used in different settings and how it's used in mindfulness. So the first type of anchoring I want to discuss is in psychology. So anchoring in psychology is a term to describe on something that we rely on, that we anchor to. And it can be a specific trait or a specific quality, specific piece of information or value. And we end up basing our decisions off this piece of information, or we try to make sense of what's going on around us through this one bit of information. And I like to call this kind of making sense of things, it's sense making, and it's understanding and making sense of everything that is in our field. And when we over rely on one bit of information, as we do in anchoring as psychology sees it, or the specific quality, then we tend to adjust our thoughts and emotions based on the information that we've anchored to. And we do this to account for other elements of the situation that we're experiencing. Now, once this anchor has been set, it tends to form a bias towards that bit of information or that value. And this can be used by companies or in sales techniques by providing a piece of information that we anchor to, and then the company delivers something different. Now, this normally works when they have perhaps an unhappy client and they over deliver on the promise that they've given us, and that promise that they'd originally given us we've anchored to. And so we become happier, we feel more at ease once they've over delivered to us. And so we're not going to leave them bad reviews, and we're going to work with them again in the future. And this is happening completely unconsciously. But when we become more mindful, we can become more aware of what's happening when these experiences happen. And so when we do hone into a specific piece of information and we isolate it, then we tend to lose sight of what else is going on. The piece of information provides a fixed point where we can make comparisons. Now, as humans, we love to make comparisons. It makes us feel more at ease. It makes us feel like we're going along the right lines and we're doing things right. But a lot of the time, we're focusing and comparing against something that someone else or another organization has done. And so we begin comparing what we're doing to that particular situation. Now, the two things that pose difficulties here is firstly, someone else has done the piece of work or the activity that you're comparing what you're doing to now, and that causes an issue because we're all completely individual. We all have our own unique talents and creativity that we bring to something. So whenever we start comparing against something else, then we're not really becoming aware of what's happening in our present awareness, in our sense perceptions. Now, the other issue is that no two moments are the same. So what was happening then is completely different to what's happening now. No two moments are the same. And so how can we really compare to something that's happened in the past when there was probably lots of different other things at play and it was being produced or being carried out in a totally different situation? So that's just a kind of background on how comparison can help us, or comparison leaves us feeling a bit short in some aspects. Now, in practice, it's not always bad to do this, but I prefer to use the word benchmarking, and it can be really helpful. But when we get fixated on these comparisons, or perhaps we're passing judgments about ourselves, or perhaps what we're comparing to, then we're failing to make sense of our true experience that's happening right now. Now, this form of anchoring can lead to automatic behaviors, thoughts, beliefs, and depending what anchor we've latched onto, it can really skew our thinking. So this is just an example of how we can be unmindful. Now, anchoring in another sense is a tool used in NLP, which I don't tend to use with clients. I tend to use mindfulness anchoring. And that's because NLP and anchoring is very similar to classical conditioning, where we try and we use it for a process where a memory recall, state change, or a specific other response can become associated with, and therefore you're anchoring it to something, a particular stimulus, in a way that anchor then leads to a reflex occurring, which occurs when you're presented with a stimulus. And this can be really well described by the Pavlov's dog experiment, which some of you may know. So essentially, in this experiment, they presented a dog with some food. Now, the food worked as the unconditioned stimulus, and it made an unconditioned response of salivation in the dog. Now, the second part of this experiment was to ring a bell without the presentation of food and to see what reaction the dog then had. Now, of course, the dog isn't salivating because it's not presented with food. You might be thinking there's someone at the door, but he's not salivating. And so this is the example of a conditioned stimulus, but it's not producing any type of response. Now, the third part of the experiment was to begin ringing the bell alongside the presentation of food to the dog. Now, because the food is there, the dog is producing the unconditioned response, or the response of salivation. And they kept repeating this and repeating this and repeating this until eventually, when they took the food away, which was the original unconditioned stimulus, the dog is still producing salivation. So this becomes the conditioned stimulus alongside a conditioned response by just the bell ringing and the dog salivating. Now, this can happen in our lives in many different ways, sometimes purposefully, or sometimes it's happening to us unconsciously. And in NLP, a really good example is when you are working with someone who perhaps has anxiety, and you try and anchor a state of a peaceful mind state, and you're trying to replace the anxiety mind state. So you can anchor this peaceful mind state to perhaps the cue of touching your thumb and forefinger together. So when you're experiencing this anxiety and you've done the practices to create this link between the positive mind state and your two fingers touching, you can, when you do this, you can then become into this calmer and more positive state of mind. Now, anchoring in mindfulness, which is the important bit, it looks a little bit like what we have done so far. In fact, in mindfulness, the two easiest forms of anchoring is the breath and the pulse and the heartbeat. So our biggest challenge in mindfulness is staying present. Even though it's the main part of mindfulness, it's also the hardest, but it's also the easiest thing to do. Anchors in mindfulness help us to not get lost in memories of the past or daydreaming, thinking about the future, what we're doing tonight, at the weekend, or perhaps the running commentary that's going on in our minds. Now, anchors work as creating a place that you can return to when your mind wanders off. So it's a great tool for bringing us back into the present moment and regaining control of our experience by bringing us back to center, becoming connected and becoming grounded. And of course, when we are anchored within ourselves, we become aware of these sense perceptions that I spoke about in the previous session, and that's what's happening all around us that sometimes we fail to notice. And this enhances our decision-making ability and this sense-making ability that I've just briefly spoken about. So it doesn't actually really matter what anchor we're using in mindfulness, as long as it's serving as a reminder to return to the present. Now, our five senses, that we live through our five senses, we experience life through our senses, which are vision, taste, touch, smell, and hearing. These five senses create the basis of our basic human experience. And our senses can create both negative and positive responses, as well as thoughts or emotions, and this can be done by particular triggers, perhaps. Now, if you see a puppy, you are likely to elicit a happy thought or emotion, and this is an example of a positive response to a stimulus through your vision sensory experience. However, if you smell a fire, you might be alerted to react. You might feel some fear or some anxiety, perhaps some stress. And this can be helpful because it can help us react or help us alert other people that there's a dangerous situation at hand. So these are just some really simple examples of how we are connected to our senses and how they elicit thoughts or emotions in our field. Now, how often do we actually pay attention to what our senses are telling us? So in those examples, they're happening, but perhaps we're not really registering the cues that our body is giving us. More often than not as well, we are allowing our senses to become more dulled by constant distractions that are happening in our modern life. We forget how powerful our senses are, and we lose touch with the ability to fully perceive what's going on in the here and now. And I think in the last session I spoke briefly about our connection to, do we know actually when we're hungry, or are we just eating at a particular time of day because that's when everyone else eats lunch? So we've become desensitized to our senses and the cues that they give us. And this can be down to a multitude of things. Perhaps we're multitasking, we're stressed, we're not fully engaged in what we're doing, and we're not connected to our bodies. And we're missing the cues that our bodies are giving to us. And so you might be able to think of a couple of situations where you've experienced this yourself. Perhaps you have some really obvious triggers of different sounds or smells or sights that elicit a specific response within you, a thought or emotion, or it can be either positive or negative. And perhaps, some of these can be caused by some trauma that's happened in our life. And, these aren't always a negative things to happen, because as I said, with the example with the fire, they can elicit a response to act, so they can be helpful, but more often than not they can sometimes be unhelpful. So an example perhaps that you might experience in the workplace is you hear a phone ring, and it actually might elicit a stress response, although you're not registering it as a stress response. Perhaps you're already stressed before the phone rings, you've got lots of things to do, you've got deadlines, and a lot of your calls are maybe sales calls, or you are receiving customer calls and you're having to deal with people that are unhappy. So you might have started to associate the phone ringing with an unhappy customer or extra work being put on your plate. And so when you hear this phone, this stress response is being created in your body, and it projects you into fear-based thinking, which is thinking about how this is going to affect you in the future. It's going to give you more stress, you've got more work to do, and it's based on a situation that's happened in the past. So you're comparing it to an experience that's happened in your past, but you're not valuing what's happening right now in the fact that it might be a new customer and it's a new day. And so we're all different, and we're all going to have different unique triggers from different sounds, sights, smells, tastes, sensations. But when we use and tune into our five senses, we can really begin to reconnect with our bodies. We can begin to reconnect with our sensations, our sense perceptions, within that's happening in our present moment. And it gives us a whole new level of experience that we can experience our day-to-day life through, and builds a much stronger connection to ourselves. So let's give it a go. We'll go through a short guided practice. So if everyone can find a comfortable seat with both feet connected to the floor, sitting tall and with your hands resting lightly in your lap. And for this guided practice, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. We will be opening them at one point. So if you could start with your eyes closed, that would be great. And as you sit here, I just want you to become connected to your breath, like we did in the previous sessions. Becoming aware of the natural rhythm of your breath. Now, as you continue to breathe, bring your awareness to what sounds that you can hear within your environment. Perhaps you can hear birds or cars, perhaps someone walking past the window. Right now for me, I can hear the wind and the rain hitting the windows. Now, whatever you can hear, let it drift in and out of your awareness, not focusing on one particular sound and not labeling it. So just as I did then, I just labeled the wind and the rain. So we're going to forget the labels, we're going to drop the labels, and we're just going to listen to the different qualities of the sounds. And in each moment's passing, just tuning in to how each sound changes moment to moment. No two sounds are the same. Be curious at how they change, and let each new sound create a level of curiousness. Let it reveal some new and unique qualities that maybe you've never heard before. Perhaps you've got lots of different sounds going on, just noticing them all. Now, slowly blinking our eyes open, have a look into your immediate area and become aware of the different colors, shapes, textures, and objects that surround you. Is there something moving in the room, or is there complete stillness? Perhaps the light is coming in through the window and there's a shadow that you've not seen before. Perhaps it's still, perhaps it's dancing. Perhaps there's an aspect of the room you've never really noticed before, or a crack in the wall, dent in the paintwork. Without labeling it, just noticing it, noticing the different qualities in the room. Exploring these objects one by one. Pick a specific object or shadow, and without labeling it, look at it as if you've never seen it before. You don't know what it is. Notice what catches your visual attention with avoiding any running commentary on it or analysis. Just let what you see come into your awareness and let it form your experience in this moment. And if your mind has wandered to thoughts or daydreams, remember that this is completely natural. This is mindfulness. As soon as you notice your mind wandering, you are transported back into the present moment. Back in your body, you're centered, you're grounded, and you're reconnected. Just come back to the breath. Now, closing our eyes again. Breathing in through our nose, absorbing all the smells that are coming from your immediate surroundings. Perhaps you can start to smell something that you haven't smelled in the room before. Is it natural, artificial? Perhaps you can smell some flowers, or there's some mustiness, or the lingering of burnt toast from this morning. Doesn't matter what you smell, and even if you can't smell anything, that's okay too. Just as long as you're staying open to and being aware of your experiencing, not labeling the smell of what it is, where it's coming from, just noticing the different qualities and how they change from moment to moment. And now we will move our attention to our sense of taste. The sense of taste within the mouth that it is in this moment right now. Perhaps there's some sweetness or bitterness, or perhaps it's neutral. Perhaps you can taste different aromas from the coffee that you had earlier in the day. But without labeling these tastes, just feel into this sensation, noticing the qualities. No analyzing or not thinking about that taste in particular. Just come back to simply sensing it for whatever it is. The sensations. Now we bring our awareness into our bodies as we sit in our chair. Perhaps you have your hands rested in your lap, or holding each hand in your hand. And if you have the ability to, just reach forward and touch the ground in front of you, connecting with the earth. Keeping your eyes closed. and letting the feeling of this touching connect you to something outside of you, something external. If you're not able to, then that's fine. You can touch an object in and around your space in front of you, or you can simply just touch one hand to the other, noticing if the thing that you're touching, if it's warm, if it's cold, rough, smooth, as if you've never felt it before. You don't know what it is, you don't know the name of that sensation that you're feeling. You're just experiencing it. You're curious about it. Connecting with that object. Keep breathing. Slowly releasing that object. And now just checking in with where you are in the body. Do you feel more centered, more grounded, more connected, more aware of everything that's happening in your immediate environment? For me, I feel a deep connection. I feel really grounded. This new kind of sense of energy, because I'm aware of everything. I might not understand everything, but I'm aware of it and I'm conscious. And hopefully you are feeling something similar right now. We're all going to be different, obviously. And with practice, perhaps you build on this connection. This connection for me, and when I practice this with other clients, other people, a lot of the time people feel this new sense of energy and they feel empowered because they're coming from this place of centeredness and not from a place of scatteredness or confusion because their mind is in the past or in the future, or is not understanding of the immediate surroundings in their vicinity. So simply blinking your eyes open. And as always, I'm just going to remind you all that we can come back to this practice at any time or any place in your day. And the idea is that these can work as different anchors. So it can be your breath that we use as an anchor. It can be coming in through listening to what's happening around you. And we're all going to choose a different anchor, and some anchors might be better in some particular situations than others. But find what's best for you. The most important thing is it has the ability to bring you back into the present moment. So, practice to take away for you to experiment with at home. So, find your anchor, and you might just want to work, as I said, with the breath or the pulse, whatever is easiest for you, whatever you're going to remember to use. But also, nature can be a really good anchor. By going out into nature and just noticing and using this practice. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? And when you're really present in nature, then you can also come back to this empowered body state. And so as long as your anchor is serving you, then go with that one. You can go through that particular practice that we've just done before and just have fun and be playful with your practices. And practice is all you need to do. You just have to remember to practice it. It's really simple, as I said before. You can practice this when you're making a cup of tea, when you're lying in bed, when you're brushing your teeth, anywhere where you get a couple of minutes. And the more you begin to practice it, then the more it begins to find its way into your life, and you can start to experience all these different benefits. So good luck with that, and I'll just leave you with my contact details. If anyone wants to get in touch to discuss anything that we've been through today or learn more about me, then please feel free to contact me. Thanks again. Bye.